Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour to dive into what this show is about, who I am, and why connection is so important. I'm so glad you're here. So thank you. I know you have a lot of options with your time, so it's exciting. This has been a dream of mine, so let's get to it. This show, my real purpose here is I want to bring knowledge, connection, and community to all of you through conversations that I have and with other guests that I invite on the show. I might have, some academic expertise and personal experience, but I am a lifelong learner and I want to learn with you. So if you have any input, questions, or corrections, because I might get something wrong, I welcome you to share that with me. You can do that through the Transformation Talk Radio site or through my website, ccwithdrt.com. Okay, so the format of this show will be twice a month on the first and third Wednesdays of each month. Each month I'll have a topic to share with you. For example, next month will be mindfulness, and we'll be talking about mindfulness in different ways. And then I'll be inviting guests on to talk about either their experiences with mindfulness or how they go about having a mindful practice, because I always want there to be something that you can take away from our time together that you can implement in your own life. And so again, write in with your ideas. If there's something like, oh, hey, let's talk about this together, I want to know about that for sure. And this is a co-creation. We are going to create this community together. I want you to ask questions again and let me know if I get something wrong or if I've gotten something right. If you'd want me to dive into another topic a little bit in more depth. Dive in more depth. Okay. And again, you can do the questions through the TTR platform or my website, which has all of my social links as well. So my website again is CC with WITH Dr. T DRT.com. And the special guests, I have some amazing friends that work in a variety of areas and friends, acquaintances, and I cannot wait to have them on the show to share with you as well. And again, if you are an expert or if you want to share your experiences, let's get you on the show too. Like, this is not just me talking at you. You can bring yourself on, or not bring yourself on, but you can reach out to me and then we can create a time where you could be on the show, or you could recommend someone that you might know that would be a good fit for this show. All right. So this show name, what did I come up with the name? Well, I have a relationship to the word connection. Almost, I was trying to name something with some friends in a distant past, not so distant past, and I kept saying connection, and it didn't become the name, which is okay because now I get to have it in my name. I love connecting people to resources. I love connecting with people, and I want the show to bring people together. We're going to be talking about some challenging topics, but I promise to do that with some humor and compassion and understanding. So no matter who you are or where you live, we are going to share some of these common denominators of being human. We'll experience loss and grief, aging if we're lucky. And then we all have these containers that we might have varying relationships with. So I want to explore, support, and learn from each other. So creating connection, that's me in a nutshell. Like I love to do that. And it's not just connecting with me, but I want to connect with you. I want you to connect with people in this community and also with the people that I invite onto the show. I don't know if some of you may know about the 5 love languages. It's a book format. It's a framework to understand how you are in relationship. And for me, one of my top 2 love languages is quality time. So this is me having quality time with you, and I hope that it's quality time for you as well. Love languages, just a side note, it hasn't been validated by research, but it is an excellent framework. And you will find out I love a good framework because it creates understanding, right? And common language. And it just helps you navigate kind of communication and your relationships with others. So I will include a link to the free quiz so that you can find out your love language if you'd like. And excuse me. So that is why, well, some of the reasons why connection is important to me. I want to start this conversation with, well, we've kind of already started, but I want to start this next bit with a quote that I love. Connection is why we're here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is a quote by Brené Brown, who is one of my sheroes. I love her and her work. I highly recommend you check out her TED Talks. But this idea of connecting, that we're here, that it's actually hardwired in us to connect with others. And when we don't, it leads to disconnection. So what happens when we're disconnected? It can lead to feelings of loneliness. And loneliness then is the absence of meaningful social interaction. Loneliness is associated with mortality and lower immunity to illnesses. So, when we're feeling lonely, that can be actually quite problematic. It's not always bad to have a bit of loneliness, but when you're thinking that solid stream, so that's kind of, we're talking about the big picture. And there's always going to be exceptions to everything that I say because we are a world full of billions of people. So it's not just my word or these researchers' words. So just keeping that in mind and share your experiences again with me on the social platforms or by emailing me. So again, loneliness is associated with mortality and lower immunity to illness. And disconnection is often equated with social rejection, social exclusion, and or social isolation. These feelings of disconnection actually can share the same, or they actually share the same neural pathways with feelings of physical pain. So, when they're, able to look into the pathways in the brain, when you're feeling these social isolation or rejection or exclusion, it actually mimics or follows that same path of physical pain. And so it is actually painful to be disconnected. Researcher Tricia Roque-Bogdan describes what to watch out for when we feel disconnected. Oftentimes, when we try to make a connection and we're unsuccessful, it can lead to like the pain and vulnerability, which then might lead to hiding parts of ourself, disconnection, or hiding our needs from others. And so when you hide your needs from others, then that is you kind of one-siding it, right? So then you're not including yourself into that circle of care or the circle of having your own needs met. But it can feel scary to ask for your needs met if you've been rejected. So no harm in that. And I do talk a lot with my hands, so I'll try not to bump the mic again. Anyway, so which may lead to hiding parts of ourselves, disconnection, or hiding our needs from others. When we experience disconnection, we learn that it's safer to keep our feelings and thoughts to ourselves rather than sharing them with others. This results in pretending we don't need others. It's a way we avoid being hurt. And again, when we go back to that quote by Brené Brown, we're hardwired to connect with others, but then we can pretend and be like, oh no, I don't need anybody. I don't need you. And that can be really a scary place to be, which then brings me to this idea of loneliness and risk factors for loneliness. There's demographic factors, health problems, so physical and mental health problems associated with loneliness. Certain personality traits can play a role in loneliness. Introverted individuals, for example, may have actually lower risk of loneliness. There could be environmental factors or social relationships. So it's ultimately the quantity and quality of social relationships that are central to loneliness. And then COVID-19 really did a number, so the research findings remained relevant during that time and actually increased social isolation, obviously, and changes in living arrangements. So we're still feeling kind of the impact of that. And I don't know about you, but I think after COVID, for me, I had gotten out of the habit of connecting with people. So it's reminding myself to connect in that way. And loneliness also can, increase risk of heart attack and greater risk of stroke. And so as we're going into break, I want you to think about that, maybe areas in your life that you have felt loneliness and how that has impacted you. So you are listening to Creating Connection with Dr. T, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about, we'll wrap up loneliness and talk a little bit about the antidote for loneliness and disconnection. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back on Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T. And in this segment, we'll be talking a bit about the antidote for loneliness and disconnection. But before that, I want to just wrap up what I was saying about loneliness and the impact that it can have. Again, it's been shown to linked to a weaker immune system and high blood pressure, and it can increase that risk of heart attack and stroke. And the risk actually was similar to that of light smoking or obesity, according to the researchers. So to lower your risk of heart disease and stroke, we need to get out and meet people. And loneliness and social isolation were also, they were just linked to both conditions. So that was in a review of studies, so over multiple time. And again, I'll have links to these research articles if you want to dive into it yourself. And the antidote here, I want this community to be part of that. And you'll kind of put the pieces together as I'm talking about that. So belonging, Brene Brown, again, you're going to hear her name a lot because she's really one of the reasons why I am doing what I'm doing. So thank you to Brene Brown. So in her book, Atlas of the Heart, she describes belonging as a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, to get uncomfortable and learn how to be present without sacrificing who we are. Because sometimes in that kind of, I want to resist vulnerability and I don't feel comfortable because parts of myself have been rejected. We might want to sacrifice ourselves, like who we are, to have it's almost a false sense of belonging. And I can, as an actively recovering people pleaser, I can tell you that is a path that I am working to change in my own life. And so being vulnerable, this show is going to be about me being vulnerable and getting uncomfortable here with all of you, but also learning to be present to those things. And then when we're doing that together, it just makes it so much easier. And so according to Cornell University, belonging is the feeling of security and support when there's a sense of acceptance and inclusion. And identity for a member of a certain group. So you might even think to yourself, where do I have a sense of belonging, that sense of security and support, where I feel accepted and included? And if you're struggling to find those areas, right now, you're a part of this group. So I hope you'll get that sense of belonging and inclusion here. belonging is closely connected with connection. Connection is that energy that exists between people when they feel seen and heard and valued, and when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive substance from strength of relationship. So that without judgment piece, it's tough. It's tough because we are, well, I will speak for myself. I can be very judgmental. When I first started learning meditation, and I'll talk more about that next month, I noticed how judgmental that I was. And that was often about myself. And so when we're in groups, if we feel that we can be ourselves without judgment, that creates that sense of belonging and connection. And it's truly a beautiful experience. And again, as I mentioned in that original quote, we are wired for connection. It's in our neurobiology. Chronic disconnection leads to social isolation and loneliness and feelings of powerlessness. So again, we're trying to, it can be kind of murky, how, if I'm feeling lonely, but I also don't feel like it's okay to be me, how do I show up and have that sense of connection? And so I'm not saying that it's always easy, but we can do this together. And research does show that people who have strong connections with others are happier, healthier, and better able to cope with the stresses of everyday life. And again, that kind of makes sense, right? If we go back to that idea of connection being the energy that exists between people when we're seen and heard and valued without judgment, then if I have an issue or I have a challenge and I'm able to connect with someone and share those challenges and know that there's a sense of acceptance and non-judgment, well, of course, then I'm sharing that burden. I'm not keeping it all bottled up inside. And meaningful social relations meaningful social interactions can include intimate relationships, friendships, family relationships, or community or work groups. So really it's broad. And I would like to add, although there's not research yet to support it, that being a part of this community will also be a meaningful social interaction for all of us. And where this is evident, there is a really cool thing, and you may or may not have heard of it, but it's called blue zones. And blue zones are regions around the world that are known for having higher than average number of centenarians, so people who live to 100 years old or more. And when I taught gerontology, I would ask my students, how many people want to live to 100? And not many people raise their hands. And we'll get into this topic when we talk more about aging and kind of the topics around that. But I want you to plant the seed. These are people who live to 100 or more, and they're living well. So without, a lot of chronic diseases and issues, because I know that there can be challenges with aging, and I'm not here to say that there's not. But these blue zones, they've found they have a lower prevalence of age-related diseases. And so they're in Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, Icaria, Greece, and Loma Linda, California. So we do have one in the States here. And so the concept of connection plays a significant role in aging well and in general. So it's the key points. There's some key points here that they've found about these areas, that they have strong social networks. So blue zone communities tend to have strong social networks, valuing close relationship with family and friends, and then that provides that emotional support and sense of belonging. It helps to reduce stress and promotes mental well-being. And that, for having that quality of life, that's so important to have those strong social networks. There's also a sense of purpose, healthy life habits, and we'll get into those a little bit more deeply in other episodes. Low stress levels have been shown to be in the blue zones. And so that is linked to strong social ties that can act as a buffer against stress. So reduced stress levels are linked to a lower risk of chronic disease and longer lifespan. Also, supportive environment. We'll talk about that in another episode. And finally, emotional well-being. So connection with others contributes to emotional well-being, reducing the risk of depression and loneliness. And then the positive emotions are associated with better health and longevity. So the social connections found in the Blue Zone are integral to the overall well-being and longevity of those residents. And so it's a sense of community, it's strong relationships, shared purpose. And in the title of this episode, I had talked a little bit about technology and how, we're kind of have that 24-hour connection, and yet we can feel even more disconnected. And it might be because we're not either in person connecting, or we're not interacting, or we're not showing up as our full selves, as mentioned earlier. So it can be a lot of different factors, and why social connections might be challenging. If you want to learn more about Blue Zones, there is a really fantastic Netflix special, and it's like a docuseries, and so it's on Netflix, and the title is "Live to 100: The Secrets of the Blue Zones." It's a really well done documentary. I learned many things from it. So I had known about the Blue Zones for a while and taught about them, but I hadn't actually. But seeing the people who are involved was really amazing, and they did a really good well. They did a really good well. So they did a really good job, and it was well done. So that was what those words got smushed together. And so just. I want to talk briefly about the barriers to connection. And so barriers, and I alluded to this earlier, but barriers to rejection are, barriers to connection are fear of rejection, fear of criticism and failure, fear of conflict, time, like I'm too busy. And I want you to think about things that might be barriers in your own connection. So as you're thinking about, okay, do I have this social network? Do I feel connected? And what stops you from, that? Is it time? Is it fear of rejection? Or maybe it's something else. And so I would love to know what other barriers you might be thinking of. And in the barriers, these are also, they're very real, because if you've had an experience of being rejected, it can be hard to be vulnerable, which Brene Brown says is the key. And she's done a lot of research. So it's not just someone saying like, oh, it's key. In her research, where she has interviewed thousands of people, vulnerability is a really important and meaningful skill, but it can be one that is wildly difficult, especially if you've had that experience. And again, remembering that those experiences are linked in the same neural pathways to physical pain. So this is not to negate those experiences and how hard it might be to put yourself out there. And so we're going to head to break here in just a minute. So you're listening again to Creating Connection with Dr. T. And after this quick break, we'll come back and I'll share a little bit about my path to here. So stay tuned and we will be right back. Hi, we're back on Creating Connection with Dr. T. And in this segment, as promised, I'm going to share a little bit more about my background. How did I get here and where is here? So I have had a long and winding road to this point. I have had many, many jobs, including working, like one of my first real jobs was working nursing homes and assisted living. I worked at a call center. I've worked in insurance, so as a claims assistant and a claims adjuster, both work comp and property. That was interesting work. And then I've also worked in the engineering field, not as an engineer, but I started as a marketing assistant, moved on to an executive assistant. I've been an HR rep and accounts payable. And in that role, I was there for well over a decade, I think. And no, I know it was over a decade, but I don't know how much more over a decade, because there was a little break in between there. But I often wore many hats. So I have this experience in the corporate world. And in fact, when I met my husband, there had been a commercial. It was for Monster Jobs, I think, a Monster Jobs commercial. And I looked it up before signing into the show today, and it was from 1999. And there was, like these little kids, and, they would say things like, when I grow up, I want to file all day. And I used to kind of make that joke about myself. I'm like, I don't care if I just file all day. As long as I get my, consistent paychecks and all of those things. And so to kind of become an accidental academic, it's quite a wild and cool path, and a path that has been paved with support. I really could not have done this without the community and support that I have in my life, which is pretty amazing. So I've always been curious. I've always been persistent. I've always, kind of been seeking, like, how can I be a better person? And as I mentioned, I love a good framework. And so self-development is really important to me. I had heard that a woman named Melanie, she had talked about self-development instead of self-help. And I love that kind of just small shift. So as I said, I've had many jobs. And when I was in kind of my last, when I was in my last corporate job, my husband had said to me, would you want to get paid for what you're doing for free already? And I didn't know what he meant. And he said, well, think about your bookshelf. And, you can kind of see, some of my books behind me. I'm so lucky to have so many books. And I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting. And I had I'd gotten laid off. So I'm kind of jumping around, and I might get into this a little bit in more detail, but I had gotten laid off in 2009 and was able to go back to school full time because I hadn't finished my undergrad degree. So I graduated when I was 41 with my undergrad degree. And in that time, I had met my advisor mentor, who is now a friend, Carrie. And once I graduated with my undergraduate degree, which I never thought that I would, and I had taken windy paths, right? So I'd gone to community colleges and I had gone to massage therapy school. I realized I liked getting massages, not giving massages. And in that time, I was like, well, I never thought I'd get this. But Carrie kept saying, what about grad school? What about grad school? And I thought, oh, no way. Like in my family, my sister and I are we're first generation college students. Kelly had gotten her degree years ago, and I was just kind of on this like windy path, right? I'd stop and start in life, and maybe you relate. And so I was finally able to graduate, meet Carrie, and then at one point, some things had been changing in my professional life. And so I asked her and I said, okay, what do I need to do for grad school? After that conversation that I had with Charlie as well. And so we were out to eat, and I wrote down on a little scrap of paper, which I do have framed in my office here, about what I needed to do to get into grad school. And I did. And so at age 44, my husband and I packed up our 2 dogs and our house and moved to Reno, where I started the social psychology program at the University of Nevada, Reno. Again, didn't kind of really understand. I was an older adult student. I, kind of wasn't in the habit of studying, a lot of stress. So we'll talk about that when we get to mindfulness. I'll go into a little bit more of that area. So while I was in grad school, I was able to work for the Sanford Center for Aging at UNR, and I was able to teach undergrads about aging. And boy, I love that job. That was really cool to talk to students about their own aging and their family's aging and really make that personal. And we'll get into that in November when we'll talk about aging in depth. After I graduated, I was hired to be the director of the gerontology academic program. And that was a role that I was in for 2 years. And if we hadn't moved back to Minnesota, I would still be there. I love that job and that team. And it was really exciting to be so involved in helping people understand aging and how it impacts and how we talk about aging and how that impacts our future aging. So now I am self-employed as a speaker and now a show host. I teach and instruct meditation. I am working what do we call it? Aspiring author. But I am working with a group called From Block to Book through Row House Publishing to work on writing a book. And I'm also a coach. So I've had the privilege of coaching people who are dealing with grief and also just life and anxiety and things like that. So I love working with people one-on-one and in small groups, and as well as speaking to people. So that kind of that's kind of like where I am and how I got here. But as far as like for this show, I have always like when I really started thinking about it, 30 years ago, I just did the math, not in my head before the show. You will find out I do not do math easily. And I was really enamored with the show Frasier. And so I don't know if any of you have seen it, but he was a radio host and he would take calls and talk to people. And I just thought that looked like the most fun to, take calls and support people with whatever they're working on. About 13 years ago, I investigated becoming a podcaster, and my working title at that time was What's Your Story, Morning Glory? Because again, I love people's stories. Like I could sit and listen. Everyone has a story. And I was stumped at the time with technology, and then I just stopped. And then about 4 years ago, my dear friend Wade and I started a podcast called Buddhas Like Us. And we did record a couple episodes, but struggled to find like a set time to record, and the editing was beyond like what we wanted to tackle. And so and I kept thinking, oh, I really want to do this. But I just did not know how to do the technology. And so when someone reached out from the Transformation Network and said that they, do all the back end stuff, I was like, all right, sign me up. So here I am, and I'm really excited to be a part of this community and to be doing this with all of you. So really dream come true, which as I was getting ready for today, I thought, holy schmoly, you say you have a dream. And again, I can go back 30 years and I mean, it wasn't persistent, but it was always a little bit there that I just want to be able to talk to and so when I realized that today as I was getting ready, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is dream come true time. And it's a little scary and also wildly exciting to be here with all of you. My husband, he started calling me a can opener because he noticed that I would meet people and strangers would just tell me deep and personal stories within a short time of knowing me. And again, I just love talking to people, and I have a tattoo. I don't know if you can see it, but it is it says one story. And one of my best friends, Danielle, she created and designed this. And the meaning is that we're all one story away from understanding another person. And so I truly believe that. I believe that with any conflict or any issues, that we are just one story away from understanding where someone's coming from. And then going back to earlier, if we can do that with non-judgment, if we can do that with a sense of curiosity, if we can do that with an open mind, which those are all really tough things to do. And mindfulness can really help with that. So that's why I say, for me, all roads lead to mindfulness. And I am excited to talk about that as a foundation. Again, we'll dive into it. You'll hear me mention it throughout all of the shows, most likely. But we'll really do a deep dive in October so you can know where I'm coming from and learn a little bit more about it for yourself. So again, we're all one story away from understanding. I'm a qualitative interviewer, which means I listen to people's stories, and that is the data that I like. And nothing makes me happier than connecting and engaging and learning about another person, like genuinely. And so to go back to Brene Brown and how she got me to here, I was reading her book, Daring to Lead. And I didn't know that interviewing could be like a path to data collection. And I was like, oh, well, stories, yeah, stories make sense to me. Numbers, do not make sense to me. Stories make a lot of sense to me. And so learning that that was a research skill, that was another piece of the puzzle of like, okay, I could go to grad school and do that. And thankfully met a really strong qualitative researcher named Kirsten, and she helped me navigate those things. And then other friends, shout out to Annie, really helped me with my quantitative, which is the numbers aspect of getting my degree. So thank you, Annie. I wouldn't be here. Well, I mean, I'm sure, but it really made it a lot easier to have someone who loves numbers. And so I've had many attempts and lifelong learning. And I am just glad to be here to share that learning with you for sure. And we are going to head to another break. And so you're listening to Creating Connections, and we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about some action items. As I promised, I want you to all have something after each episode that you can take and apply in your own life. So we'll talk about action items, and then we'll end up our first episode together. So thank you so much. We'll be right back. All right, we are back on Creating Connection with Dr. T. In this segment, I'm going to talk about action items, but to wrap up like who I am and how I got here, it is been a real treat. And, you know, I went to travel agent school. And I've tried a lot of things. So again, it's never too late to become who you might have been. It's one of my favorite quotes by George Eliot. I have it pretty prominently on my website. And I also had it on my personal statement. Excuse me. All right. So action items, and how, if you're struggling with some feelings of disconnection or loneliness, or you just want to kind of bolster your sense of belonging and therefore increase those health benefits that were mentioned earlier. Action items, start small, and I know that can be really difficult. And in wellness, I'm going to talk about that with like exercise or, shifting things in your eating. But starting small with this as well, it can seem like, oh my gosh, well, then now I have to go and book up my social calendar, or I need to run around and do all these things. No, just start small. When you're interacting with someone, ask questions. And be genuinely curious and open. A lot of times what we do when we ask questions, especially of people that we know, we can think that we know what they're already going to say, right? We can just be like, oh yeah, I already know this person. I've been with them for, 20 years and this is what they're going to say. But really, truly, and again, we'll talk about this with mindfulness, if you have a beginner's mind and you ask those questions and you're really curious and open to what they're going to say, that helps, because people can sense that curiosity. People can sense that genuine interest, that you want to know what they have to say. And on that is staying open and curious and compassionate. So not only like compassionate with others, but compassionate with yourself. So how can you stay open and curious and compassionate, maybe even about your own loneliness, or maybe about like this sense of not belonging, versus like, oh, it happened because of this, and this, and getting into the stories of it. But how can you have some compassion for maybe a sense of loneliness or disconnection that you might be feeling? And how can you stay open, curious, and compassionate towards other people in your life? And so that just means like sitting down with someone and saying like, I don't know, maybe I don't know all there is to know about someone. And then on that note, being authentic and sincere. And so authenticity and sincerity can feel really vulnerable, right? Like you might think, oh, I need to sound smart, or I need to do this, but really being authentic and sincere. When we were on break, I was telling the producer, Sierra, that I was like, oh, that felt a little rambly. And, but that's who I am. I can ramble, and I hope you like stick with me, because I'll usually remember to circle back to the point. But I am really sincere in my desire to get to know you all and to be known by you. And so that's, those are some action items. And there's a book called I thought I had it handy, but it's called Together, and it's by the 19th and 21st Surgeon General. And he has some points that he talks about. He was doing research and trying to see like what's the biggest issue in the country, and he found that loneliness was one of the biggest issues. And so he has some really good kind of 4 points. So spending time each day with those you love, by devoting at least 15 minutes each day to connect with those you most care about. That could be on the phone, that could be in person, it could be on Zoom. But how are you connecting with other people? And that could be connecting with a pet as well. So, spending time, like intentional time. And often, I don't know about you, but it can be really easy to like pick up the phone, like a cell phone, and just be on the phone. And you might be in the same room with someone, but it might not feel like you're actually connecting. At least that is for me. And that's because you're not like doing that, being open, asking questions, being authentic. And so can you spend at least 15 minutes a day connecting with people that you care about and being that authentic, vulnerable, and sincere person? And then focusing on each other, which I was alluding to. So forgetting about multitasking. And research shows, and no one likes when I say this, I shouldn't say no one, but research shows that we can't multitask. It is, our brains are not wired for that. And so if you can set down like what you're doing or set aside what you're doing for those 15 minutes and give that other person the gift of your full attention, making eye contact if possible, and then genuinely listening. And again, if you can listen with that curiosity and non-judgment, that can make a really big difference on having other people feel supported in being connected with you. All right, this might surprise you, but the third item he had listed was embrace solitude. And he mentions that the first step towards building stronger connections with others is really to build a stronger connection with yourself. And you can do this through meditation, prayer, art, music, time spent outdoors. That's all can be sources of solitary comfort and joy. And then to go back to that point of number 2, well, don't multitask. So if you are going for a walk, can you just go for a walk and without, maybe not every time, because, come on, listening to podcasts is one of my favorite activities. So you might want to do that on your walk, but really to connect with yourself would be to do those things without other distractions and to really kind of let yourself get to know you in those ways. And that is taking time and allowing yourself to be a priority. And we'll probably talk about that in January when we talk about well-being and wellness. But I'll always kind of touch into these things. These are all interwoven for me. And so solitude, embracing solitude. And then finally on that, and his list is to help and be helped. So he talks about service being a form of human connection that actually reminds us of our value and purpose in life. And purpose and value came up a lot in the Blue Zones. And so what is your value and purpose in life? This could mean checking in on a neighbor. You might seek advice or even just offering a smile to a stranger. Or, thinking, kind thoughts to the person in line in front of you. It can make us stronger because then we start seeing that interconnectedness that we share just by the fact of being human. Another way to do this is to sign up for Mindful Mondays. And what are Mindful Mondays? It is a community and group that I've started. So in COVID, my co-teacher and facilitator, Heather Haslam, and I started a morning meditation group that we met every day for 90 days. And then we met 3 times a week for over 2 years, about 2.5 years. And so I've had a break in between with the move and different other changes in my life, but I've started them up again. So once a week on Mondays, hence the name, Mindful Mondays, at 1 p.m. I told you numbers weren't my thing. 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central and 10 a.m. Pacific. I have a link to a Zoom that you can join, and I will guide a meditation. So what that looks like is I'll just usually maybe read a little something or talk about something that's going on in my life, and then we meditate together in community. And then there's a little bit of time after for questions. So if you are looking for a way to not only, embrace solitude, why does this keep falling out of my ear? Weird. To embrace solitude, but to also be in community. Mindful Mondays are where it's at. So it is free to join. There's a link on the episode page or also in my website. So this is not anything that you have to pay for. And I would just love to create that community and grow that. And it was great. We had our first one on the 18th, and there were people who I meditated with over COVID who joined up again. So even though it's been over a year later since our last one, we had people coming in, and boy, it was great to see their faces, and I hope to see yours. Or you don't have to have your camera on, it's fine. But it is a great way to be in community. And I want to just take a moment here and end with a quote that is, I think, super powerful. It's by Sandra Day O'Connor, who's known to be the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court in the United States. She also has a wildly exciting and robust bio, but that's what she's best known. And so this quote is, "We don't accomplish anything in this world alone. And whatever happens is the result of the whole tapestry of one's life and all the weavings of individual threads from one to another that creates something." And so the winding road that took me here to be with all of you, I am just so grateful that this is another thread in the tapestry of my life, and I hope it becomes one in your life. And so I do want to thank you all for tuning in to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T. I know you have a lot of options, and I'm really so glad that you chose to spend this time with me. I, for one, had a fantastic time. Please join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific. Next month, again, we'll be talking about mindfulness. And until then, take good care of yourself and others, and I'll see you back here next time. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss, grief, and aging if we're lucky. Let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.